You know, a lot of the reasons why people start following Jesus and then give up, I'm going to follow you, God, and then they stop following him. Well, sometimes it's because they pray for something and God doesn't answer the way they expected him to answer, or it can be people letting you down. People let down, especially if it's someone you admired and they claim to be a follower of Jesus and they let you down. That's pretty heavy to handle, especially as a new follower of Jesus. And then sometimes it's circumstances, a circumstantial setback where, why is this happening, God? Like, I'm trying to do my best to follow you, to live for you, and then this happens in my life. I was preparing a teaching for my One Church TO family here in Toronto, and I noticed Mary had her share of people letdowns and circumstantial setbacks. Let's just look at an example of each of them. The circumstantial setback had to be the big one, where she leaves her hometown of Nazareth to travel to Bethlehem, old little town of Bethlehem. You probably heard some of these Christmas carols. And she goes there in the 9th month of her pregnancy. What a time to travel. I mean, it was several days' journey to go across northern Israel down to Bethlehem. And then she gets there, and what is she greeted with? There's no Airbnb, there's nothing. There's just no place to stay. I mean, you can understand her starting to have legit questions like, God, if I'm really carrying your son, who's the savior of the world, why am I facing circumstances that are just like saying closed door, no room at the end? And why is your son being born in a stable that animals are supposed to stay in? And most of all, why am I having to use for a crib an animal's feeding container? Remember the manger, away in a manger? It wasn't all romantic and, all warm fuzzies for Mary when she's dealing with the raw reality of having a baby and laying it in an animal's feeding trough. And so it's a legit question. Where are you, God, in these circumstances? If this is really your son, if I'm really trying to do what you want me to do with my life, why am I facing these circumstances? And then there's the people setbacks, because King Herod of that time gets tipped off by the wise men. Remember the Magi, the 3 wise men that we sing about in the Christmas carols? They come in and they say, we're following this star. There's a newborn king. King? And Herod is paranoid. I mean, he's killed off family members, a couple of his own children, just so paranoid about someone trying to take his position. And so when he hears about this new king in the land, he ends up going and killing off what historians say would have been about a dozen baby boys in Bethlehem under 2 years of age. So the Magi, inadvertently tip off King Herod to do this murderous act, one of his many. But the Magi come and they worship the baby Jesus. Remember, they bring those gifts, frankincense, myrrh, and gold. And they, it must have been a meaningful moment. But then what happens is, because of King Herod, Mary and Joseph are warned that they have to flee Israel, get out of town, because Herod's coming to kill. And so they flee to Egypt for their safety. And here they are. Why, God, would you have us go to Egypt when all the Bible prophecies talk about your son being born to save his people, the people you have a covenant with that you talked about so many times throughout the centuries? What are we doing over in Egypt when we're supposed to be in Israel? All because of a person's hatred and jealousy and paranoia. So people let down, circumstantial stuff. Those are the times, aren't they? For me anyway, and I'm sure for you, where you just begin to doubt and wonder, God, I'm trying to follow you. If I'm trying to follow you, then why am I treated this way by people? Injustice in the workplace or in the education that I'm going I'm part of, or the circumstances of my life. Why are they going like this when I'm just trying to do what's right? I'm trying to follow you. So a lot of us give up. But you know what? If you hang around, you'll see what happens to Mary. Mary ends up having shepherds knock on the door of the stable, whatever they did to announce their entrance. They had just come from a birth announcement in the sky, an angelic host. Hark the herald angels sing. Remember that Christmas? There they are up there in the air, and they're announcing to the shepherds on the hillside that there's a new king that's born in Bethlehem, the city of David. They can go and see him. And they say, this will be a sign. This is how you'll know it's really the Messiah. You'll find him wrapped in strips of cloth and lying in a manger, an animal's feeding container. And so they go and they tell Mary all that they have seen. Mary and Joseph are there, and they tell them this. And so Mary, it goes on to say, ponders these things in her heart, because here she was questioning God. God, are we even doing what you want us to be doing? Why are we facing these circumstances when we're just trying to do what's right? And then these shepherds show up and say, no, you're right on in the plan of God. He wants this humble beginning for his son. He identifies with all people in all situations. It just helps us out as humans in so many ways that Jesus was born that way. But Mary is reassured by the shepherds. And then, of course, the wise men gave gifts, right? One of them was gold. I see that as God's prearranged finances for them to live as political refugees in a foreign nation called Egypt until it was safe to return to Nazareth. Do you see that? See how God, we see stuff happening at this level and we get obsessed with what's wrong and injustice and the hurt and the pain and the mistreatment of people, but the whole time God is at work. And here's what I'm saying. I think some of us don't hang around long enough. I'm not going to follow God anymore because this person let me down, or this injustice happened, or these circumstances aren't good. They're not fair, not what I prayed for. And we give up on God when he wants to tell the rest of the story. Jesus said this. He said, in this world, you will have tribulation. You can expect things to go wrong. It's a broken world. It's not following my plan. In this world, you have tribulation, but then he goes on to say, but be of good cheer, be encouraged. I have overcome the world. We need to stay with Jesus long enough to see him overcome. Get to a place where we can look back and say, oh my goodness, God, you were there the whole time. Even in my lousiest circumstances and the harshest mistreatment of people, you were there for me, God. And then there's the Apostle Paul also wrote in the Bible and in the New Testament part of it. And he said this, he said, all things work together for good for those that love God and are following him, called according to his purposes. Notice he says, all things work together for good. He doesn't say all things are good. He doesn't even say all things you're going to quickly find out are going to work together for good, but over time. So I guess what I'm trying to do is encourage you. If you're feeling at all like, why is this happening in my life? Or why these people let me down? Keep trusting Jesus. He's still at work. The last half of the story hasn't been told. Keep trusting Jesus.